What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Muscle Podcast. We've got another book review for you guys today. Jake, what's going on, man? You ready to break down Atomic Habits?
I'm excited. This is one of my favorites, so I think we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, and if you've listened to any of my podcasts or any of my content or just been around me in the last probably 2 years, you're going to recognize some things that I talk about. And as I was going back through this book, I'm like, oh, that's why I say it that way. That's why I take that approach. That's why I tell people at a habit level to change these things. And you'll see it as we get into it. But I think this is another one of those books where it's like free throws. College basketball is going on still, obviously. And so it's free throws, layups, and people are like, habits, okay, yeah, habits, and free throws and bounce passes, okay, free throws, bounce passes. But that's where the game's won, is with the simple things. And, enough layups and free throws, you win the game. And that's what we're going to do here is go over Atomic Habits. So let's go real quick by the numbers. Authors James Clear. I completed this 4/12/2019. Listen time at 5:35 if you're on Audible. Pages 319. Released on October 16th, 2018, which is interesting. It was like 2 weeks after Stillness is the Key. So that would have been a good month back in 2018 to work on yourself. Readability for me, 8 out of 10. Rating, 7 out of 10. Kind of similar to Stillness is the Key in that it's just super straightforward, not earth or mind shattering, but it's almost like a victim of its own simplicity and simple wins.
hmm Yeah, I didn't realize this book came out in 2018, but I guess that makes sense. It is kind of still, as far as classic nonfiction books go, it is still pretty relatively new. But for me, yeah, I finished this book. I guess it was in 2020. I thought it was more recently than that, but the end of 2020, November. And for me, readability 10 out of 10. I really like the way that James writes and makes very salient examples. He uses some illustrations where necessary. All the chapters are pretty tackleable length. And so I like that about it. Rating 9.5 out of 10. This is really, like I said, one of my favorite books I've ever read as far as just the nonfiction category. There's a lot of things in here that I think about every day, parts of the book that I try to implement in my own life every day. And I knew this stuff before, kind of like you said, but making it more visceral and making a lot of solid examples in the book is one of the things that helped me to put some of these things into practice in my life. So we'll get to that, I'm sure, but I really like this book a lot. It's probably the number one book that I recommend when people are just trying to make some positive changes.
Yeah, I've got the book sitting behind me in our shelf, and I read it or I listened to it in audio format, but Haley's coach sent it to her. And so it is really like one of those staple books where anytime you're working on developing a new habit, pairing this book with that would be really kind of the perfect way to start.
And I didn't read this book for the longest time just because, like, I did think I knew everything about habit formation and I thought I had healthy habits, but it really did do a lot for me just as far as making things very actionable and defined. And I think that that's an important thing that a lot of nonfiction books can tend to skip over, make it in pragmatic.
Yeah. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, just kind of going over the summary, is this little part right here where it's just saying make every action a vote for what kind of person you want to become. Building habits is becoming the version of yourself you want to be. Habits help you to trust yourself. And that part of habits help you to trust yourself is really tied to the idea that discipline and trust are combined. Because if your parents say, hey, don't throw rocks at the house, and then they say they're going to discipline you after, when they do that, and they do discipline you, then you trust what they say. And so when you follow the habits or you have the habits that you want to have and you have that discipline, you're going to trust yourself to get the result that you want because the habits are in place. And so I thought that was super interesting. And so when you can ask yourself, what would a healthy person do? What would a marathon runner do? What would a insert your goal and like the habits of that person do? I think that's a really powerful question to ask. And then what feels like fun to you but has worked to others is a good way to think, oh, maybe that's a habit for me, as opposed to this, like we were talking on our last Q&A about like forcing yourself to wake up early, and habits would be the opposite of that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to jump into a couple quotes right off the top?
Yeah, sure, we can jump into some
So
quotes.
my a couple of my favorites, and I think that these all hit on a similar idea, but really stuck out to me as far as things I think about a lot. And that's too often we convince ourselves that massive success requires massive action. So he really makes the point so often with the 2 minute rule is a good example, just that small things made habitual are a lot more important than big actions. Like he says in the quote, it doesn't always have to be something huge, as long as you're making it something consistent that happens in your life, and eventually something you can start to do without willpower and without having to think about it. That's really the important thing. And even if it isn't something big and huge right away, just repeating that habit is the most important thing.
Yeah. There's a couple quotes that were just real good singers right off the bat. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, which is really similar to a quote that's essentially you do not rise to the level of expectation, you rise to the level of like your training or something to that similar effect, where basically it's saying you're not going to you're not going to surprise yourself or go beyond your lowest common denominator. So it's like your training and what you fall to, or your systems is going to be what you fall to, because you can't just assume that you're going to get best case scenario or all time best in terms of productivity and goals and systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the other two that I highlighted that I still think about a lot to this day is you should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than your current results. So really just trying to focus on the downstream effect of your actions. Especially, I think this is important for younger people like you and I when it comes to career. A lot of times we want to see the results, we want to see the big important milestones, but if you don't start out with the right actions and you don't build your career or whatever it is you're focused on in your personal life, with your health, whatever, if you don't build on the most important habits and make those the forefront of your focus, then you're not going to see those results in the long term. Being short term focused is, I think, a lot more common these days, but the people that really see success in whatever it is, like I said, career, health, are the type of people that are focused on where they're going and trying to put themselves in a good place 5, 10 years down the road. And then the other quote here that falls right in line with that is good habits make time your ally, bad habits make time your enemy.
Mm, that is really interesting because I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and there was a Q&A into the Jocko podcast, and the question was basically asking, how do I know if I'm doing the right thing as I am a father and a husband, and basically just like kind of like life advice. And his quote was, you don't really necessarily have a binary way of saying this, but he referenced a judge at some point in the Supreme Court or something where he's like, I don't have the definition of pornography, but I know it when I see it. And so coming back to how he answered that guy's question, he's like, you won't always know the right answer, but you'll be able to like tell. You can tell in your soul that you're doing the right thing. And so to your point about the habits, like that's kind of like how how that stood out to me. Say that quote again.
Good habits make time your ally, bad habits make time your enemy.
Yeah. So if someone's wondering, oh, is this a good habit? Is it making time your ally? Is it making time your enemy? And another thing that they broke down was, is video games good or bad? Well, is it making time your ally or is it making time your enemy? If you're playing 3 hours a day, time's your enemy. If you're playing for 30 minutes to decompress, rest, recover, and then get back to what you're doing, maybe it's your ally. But I think all of those for me just fuse into a way of being able to discern yes, no, good, bad. And there always is going to be gray area, but you know deep down if it's making it your ally or if it's not.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote that I have seen attributed to both Bill Gates and Tony Robbins, and the time scale I've seen put a lot of different ways, but it usually goes something like most people overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And sometimes I've seen the quote as like a month versus a year, but essentially we are very bad at estimating what we can get done in a short period of time, but we underestimate the value of positive habits and really thinking on a long-term horizon and trying to accomplish things over a long time scale so that we can really just learn and iterate on our processes and really let the compounding of good habits and good decisions take effect.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that word compounding because I think that's why our brains can't break down it's thinking in a linear trajectory as opposed to a hockey stick trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you put that quote. You should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than your current results. That's what I had as my second quote. And in the last book review, I was like, man, I wonder when we're going to pull the same quote
Mm-hmm.
and read it. And we did in this one, so that's interesting. But I was having this conversation with clients in our Q&A yesterday for people in the E4 Fit method, and it was talking around visualization. I was going through my 3 pillars of mindfulness, and visualization is the practice of creating a relationship with the person that you are already. And I say already as opposed to the person you're becoming, because right now, you listening to this, sitting in your chair, you're the accumulation of all of the habits and actions that you have taken in the last 3 months, last 3 years. And now, what you are doing in terms of your actions is creating the future you. And so, in a way, you are already where you want to be. Time just hasn't caught up to that yet. And so, that quote around being far more concerned with your current trajectory is just being far more concerned with the inputs that you're putting in right now, because that's going to lead to your current results. And that's how I like to think about visualization, because you're basically just visualizing the person at an identity level that you are going to be, but in a way, you already are that person if you're living into those habits. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Do you remember the example about the airplane? About how if an airplane switches course 1 degree, oh man, I should have looked it up to get the example exactly right, but I think it's something along the lines of if an airplane was going from LA to New York and it switched course just 1 degree, it would end up in Washington D.C. rather than New
Yeah.
York. So just showing that over time, even these small decisions make such a huge impact given a long enough time scale again.
Yeah, no, I remember that. That's a really good one. And I'll sometimes say that in the form of like a NASA rocket ship, where like one little calculation can be off and you end up in Mars instead of the moon.
Mm-hmm. I was trying to look for this other quote about compound interest. I think this is it from Albert Einstein. He said that compound interest is either is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So it's interesting because a lot of times in investing, people will point to the fact that like you said, our brain just have a hard time understanding compound interest. And I think that money and knowledge work so similarly in the way they compound, because you really don't start to notice the effects of accruing a lot of knowledge or accruing a lot of money in as far as how it can expand on itself until it really gets to a high level. So it's kind of like, it reminds me of another really good nonfiction book, which is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, where he talks about, you're putting in all this work and sometimes it's hard to ever see the effects, but then everybody has that point where you see things start to tip in the other direction. You really see a big spurt of growth. So as much as we would like to see the effort we put in and the accrual of good habits pay off sequentially and pay off obviously, a lot of times it's just something where it takes a really long time, and then for some reason we just hit this spurt where we see these positive effects in just a short burst of time or by one happenstance.
Yeah. And that was one of the good takeaways for me for this book, and just good reminders. It's Yesterday was the first day of spring, and so you can say we're what, a third into the year. I guess not a third, not even a quarter, because December 21st. Anyway, we're in a new season, and January 1st, everyone has their goals, and one of the big pillars of this book is just the concept of the 3 levels of change being outcomes, your goals, processes, your systems, and then identity, who you perceive yourself to be. The lower, the more fundamental. And even just getting wrapped up in goals, or even getting wrapped up in the processes, can be what causes yourself to fall short, because at the core of it is really your identity and who you perceive yourself to be. And we're coming back to this specific time when I was training for a marathon and I wanted to run a sub 3 hours. And I was laying on my bed one day and needed to go do a 6 mile run. And I just asked myself the question, what would a sub 3 marathon runner do? And I just was like, God damn it. I got up out of bed and went for the run. But that question right there is, whatever variation it needs to be, is one of the most powerful things, because at that point you need your identity to show up, and whatever your true identity is going to be what answers that question, and ultimately the actions that you take.
Yeah, I like the example he uses in the book when he talks about identifying with habits of someone who's trying to quit smoking. He says, one type of person, if offered a cigarette, might say, "No, thanks, I'm trying to quit." But the person who's going to be more successful in the long term would say something like, "No, thanks, I'm not a smoker."
Hmm.
So, really just making it concrete. I think that another really good example of this is just making choices because you're a healthy person. If you're someone who is trying to make a change and trying to make changes to make your lifestyle more healthy, if you think you're fighting against the inner part of you that isn't a healthy person, that's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of conflict. But if you change your mind and say, from here on out, I am a healthy person and I do things that a healthy person does, it makes it easier to go do a workout when you don't want to, when you'd rather stay home and watch TV. It makes it easier to order a salad instead of a burger. Just like easy stuff like that becomes more just the default behavior. And I think that one thing this book points to, but is one of the most important lessons for people when it comes to creating good habits, is so often we think that the people with the most success just have the highest willpower and are making tough choices day in and day out. But in reality, they've just used different mental frameworks to make positive decisions the right decisions for them. So again, going back to that question from our last Q&A about forcing yourself to wake up early, people that are successful don't have to force themselves to do anything. They make good decisions as frictionless as possible, A, and B, I think that they really just try to do things that are already in line with their strengths and with their preferences.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I don't think it was in this book, but there was a time where someone was talking about a professional athlete, and they were going through like, why don't you go out to the clubs? Why are you, waking up at 6 a.m.? And the guy responded, he's like, because I'm an athlete. Like that's what I do. And he responded and then even articulated afterwards, almost thinking like that was a dumb question for someone to ask why he would do something against his identity. And it almost doesn't compute for someone to say, hey, why don't you take a day off when you should be working out? Or why don't you go out to the clubs when you got a game the next day? Like
Mm-hmm.
his identity hears that, and that's like hearing someone say, "Why don't you fly?" It's like, well, because I'm not a bird.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Uh, one thing that I definitely noticed throughout the book is he'll point to his website a lot, and whether you like that or not, and he'll have like the helpful PDFs. One thing that he has that is outside of this book is his 321 newsletter. Do you subscribe to that?
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of the I think two newsletters that those types of books have got me hooked on, and so it's a 321 newsletter, and I won't go. I was gonna maybe go through the entire newsletter, but basically it's three ideas from me, so James Clear, two quotes from others, so other people that he thought were inspiring quotes, and then one question for you. And it's a fascinating read, and I've had it, even like clients be like, "Hey, do you subscribe to this?" I'm like, "Yeah, like this is really good." One question he had from the one most recent this last week is, what is your desired dose? What do you need right now? A little bit more, a little bit less. And it was talking around this concept of just like relaxation. And it's like, would a 2 week vacation be the desired dose? Or do you just need a day to yourself? Or do you just need 10 minutes to yourself? And if you can just get that desired dose, like the most useful dose, then you can get right back into what it is that you're doing. But anyway, really good stuff in that newsletter. And if you read this book, you'll notice that he pushes to the website a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say the most valuable thing you could join outside of the book or listening or reading the book would be the newsletter.
Definitely. So just to jump into the rest of the summary and different takeaways, like we talked about, compound interest was a really big takeaway for me. Other things, systems rather than goals. And I had that quote that you mentioned here: you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So I think that that's something we kind of already hit on with just trying to make things as frictionless as possible. You don't want to wake up and have to make a bunch of decisions. You just want to make the right decisions easy and almost without thought. So he talks about the fact that we're not after results, but we're after systems. When you can build good habits, you know that you're going to have good results. And so you don't have to think about it and fixate on it as much. Other things I really liked: the 4 laws of behavior change, habit stacking, the 2 minute rule. We can go into all that, but do you have anything that, like, in your personal life has benefited from being more of a systems approach than a goals oriented approach, or something that you've changed your mind on over time?
Yeah, I think the obvious and invisible. So there's the things you want to achieve and things you want to avoid. And right now I have these two big light shining on me. I've got my camera set up, and in the past, these would all be in storage or all be in a closet. And when we moved, I made this I put my foot in the ground. I was like, I want the office and I need these things to stay permanently set up because it now makes it so turnkey and so easy. And that's one of the other things. Like, if you want to achieve things or things you want to avoid, you want it to be obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. It's now so easy for me to turn on my camera, record content for YouTube, record this podcast, record anything, versus if I have to every single time pull all the equipment out, set all the equipment up, it's so unattractive. It's not easy to do from a time standpoint. And it's not something that's constantly coming across my field of view. But now, like, I'm seeing this every single day. And it's very hard for me to not want to create because I'm just like in a creator's environment.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean the systems thing is so huge. It's kind of just like, again, we've talked about the importance and the benefit of tracking your calories before too, but when you combine like the calorie and macro tracking with I just eat these things on a regular basis, like even just for breakfast and lunch, I'm always going to have meals that are similar. Those type of things are what make the outcome, which is falling within your calories and macros, so much easier. So another thing he talks about is, yes, this book is about habits, but we're not after habits necessarily, we're after outcomes. So I think that kind of speaks to another point in the book, which is don't get too hyper fixated on completing the habit just because that's what you should do or it just feels good to check off the box, but make sure your habit is actually leading towards something. It's leading towards a desired outcome. Don't just make it something where, oh, well, I think I'm supposed to do this, so I'm going to do it regardless of if I see positive results from that or not. I can get caught up in that, I know too, as someone who likes to make lists and, I'll have a to-do list, I'll have a schedule that I try to stick to. But I think something I could do more often is just really try to take inventory of the things I'm spending my time on, make sure they're positive and leaning towards positive outcomes, do some sort of an audit. I think that's something that's beneficial for people as far as time management.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that you just talked about there reminds me of morning routines or this belief that you have to do something. Think of like an athlete before a game. They have to go through this specific routine so that they can then play at a high level or so that you can then have a good day of work. But the goal is a productive day of work. The goal is not to have a perfect morning routine every single day. And just be aware that that could be a crutch, and what happens when that crutch is removed. Are you going to fall over? Are you going to be able to have a productive day at work? And you could save yourself 30 minutes, some people 60 minutes, by just waking up, going to your computer with your cup of coffee and just working. And
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be times where maybe you do go meditate and you do go for your walk and you do go read and journal and all these things. But if you take all these things that you're supposed to do and all these habits you're supposed to have before you work, you've now got a 2 hour routine before you get to work, whereas you could just be 2 hours into work right when you wake up.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. As far as the laws of behavior change, that was another one of my favorite parts about the book. He talks about so there's four different laws of behavior change, and there's a um, a law for making a habit stick and making a bad habit easier to overcome. So, for example, the four are make it obvious, and the reverse would be make it invisible, make it attractive, the opposite being make it unattractive, make it easy or make it difficult, and make it satisfying or make it unsatisfying. So for me, something that's an easy example, and I think I actually did start doing this once I read Atomic Habits. So, like I said, a lot of things from this book really did stick. I won't take my TV out unless I'm actively watching it. So I'll put my TV out away from view when I'm not watching TV because it leads to less mindless watching of TV and just turning it on because it's there. So that's a good example for me of making not that it's always a negative habit, but I guess the mindless watching of TV is a habit that I don't want to build on. And so I try to make it less attractive and make it invisible, difficult, unsatisfying. I guess it has a component of all four of those things just because I really have to want to watch something if I'm going to get out my TV and set it up and turn it on, et cetera, versus just having it be there on the ready.
Yeah, I do the same thing with social media. If I have to have an app on my phone, I put it inside like 3 or 4 squares. So it's like a folder inside a folder inside a folder. If I
Hmm.
need something easily accessible, I put it on my bottom four, which would be like your top four, or anyone who remembers MySpace, your top eight. The so if and then to carry on with that, like something like TikTok, I don't have on my phone. If I find myself in a hour window where there's nothing to do and I can spend it on TikTok, I'll download TikTok and go on. It takes 30 seconds to download TikTok. And as soon as I'm like, okay, I do not want to spend time on this, TikTok's gone. And I think that's a super tangible way to give yourself some time back by making it harder, to your point with the TV. Unplug it, put the channel changer somewhere, move the TV away. That's now invisible, hard in order to watch TV.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, trying. I think one of the main components of our coaching structure is we don't, especially like when it comes to diet and nutrition, we don't ever tell you that anything is totally off limits. But we talked about the "is it worth it" strategy that I use a lot on previous podcasts. I've talked about before that I don't keep desserts and stuff like that in my apartment because I know it'd be so much more easy to just get some ice cream out of the freezer and have it. And not that I can't make that work with my nutrition and with my macros, whatever, but I just know that it is going to require so much willpower to not eat it. So, for example, I can kind of have dessert whenever I want to. Like I said, I'm a big ice cream fan, but I make sure that I have to go out and get it from some place. And so that, again, kind of like the TV example, makes it so it's not just something I can do mindlessly and just do on a whim. But if it's something I really want to do, because there's that barrier there, it's going to ensure that yes, I'm making an intentional choice here and not just something that's mindless.
Yeah. And I think it sounds like it's not that big of a deal, but do you think though the amount of times in your head where you have this negotiation with yourself where you're just like, ah, it's not worth it. And it could
Mm-hmm.
be something so simple as going and getting your mail and just be like, ah, I don't want to walk up the stairs. It's not worth it. So those stairs are exactly what this is talking about. It's now harder to do that. And it doesn't like some people won't go to the gym because it's raining outside. You work out in the gym, but that rain is literally enough of a deterrent for you to not do that. You can
Mm-hmm.
set this up to work for you by making those bad habits harder for you or further away from you or not as satisfying, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, and it is so interesting because it seems like I think part of the rationalization is that we like to give ourselves more credit than we really deserve as far as, oh well, I can just decide not to do something. And that's true. But I think we have to realize that willpower is so finite that the more we can not have to use our willpower to not eat the ice cream that's in the freezer, to not have to, do whatever other habit it is that's a bad habit that we're trying to avoid, the harder we can make it and the less we have to use willpower to do so, the better off we're going to be. So a good example that I talk about a lot also is the example of like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg are famous for wearing the same thing every single day. And the rationale behind that is you can only make so many decisions throughout the day. So every time you make a decision, what to have for breakfast, what to wear, what song to listen to, like anything like that. Obviously, the point is not that you should try to make hardly any decisions throughout the day, but just understand that if every morning you have to make some sort of a breakfast that is going to fit your macros, that's going to be tougher than every morning I have 3 eggs and a cup of oatmeal, and that fits in line with my macros. Or other examples, like if you wake up and maybe you either work for yourself or you have a job that gives you a lot of autonomy. If you wake up and sit down at your desk and you have to decide what you're going to work on every day, that's going to be a lot more difficult than, okay, from 8 to 9 every morning, I check and respond to emails, or from 9 to 10 every morning, I, work on some project that I'm working on, stuff like that, where you don't have to factor in willpower. And so that when you need to call upon willpower for some reason, it's more readily available and it's not worn down, because willpower really does get worn down very easily.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue into habit linking. And
Mm-hmm.
you brush your teeth. Well, if you can add a habit that you want to incorporate right after brushing your teeth, you're always going to brush your teeth. So you don't have to start some sort of routine or procedure to get this new habit going. You just brush your teeth and then you read, or you just read and then you meditate, or you get in bed and as soon as you charge your phone, not on the nightstand, but on the other side of the room or in another room. I'm super big on that one. Then you go and read, like whatever it is, just habit link them so that you have one, two, three things that you do, and that you can tie them to something that you already have as a habit.
Yeah, I love the habit stacking. And another thing that he talks about in line with that is temptation bundling. So if there's a habit that you're wanting to try to build, but it's difficult for you to build, tie it to something positive. So if you have a positive connection to your morning coffee, and that's something that you enjoy every morning, you like the taste, you like the smell, etc., try to stack that with your half an hour you want to spend reading in the morning or whatever that is. Um, just trying to stack an automatic habit that you already have with something that you're trying to make a habit, and so you have that positive association. But I even kind of noticed in my own speaking there, I kind of glossed over something else that's made a big point of in the book, which is the 2 minute rule. So often we want to say that, oh, I'm going to do 20 minutes of meditation, or like I just said, spend a half hour reading. And James points out that, again, because the habit formation and just the regularity of making something a part of your routine, the 2 minute rule is that when you're starting out a habit, it should take no more than 2 minutes. So 2 minutes of meditation, 2 minutes of reading, 2 minutes of, if you don't exercise at all, 2 minutes of exercise a day is already a big improvement. So just trying to build habits and not trying to make it to where, oh, I have to exercise for an hour, I have to read for an hour, I have to do, whatever thing that you're not doing at all, expecting to do that for an extended period of time is going to make it so much harder to make into a habit.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if have you ever done the couch to 5K or had anyone do that?
Mm-mm.
The start of it is just like that, where you're not doing even like half a mile. It is the shortest amount of distance. I forget exactly what it was, but I had a client go through it, and I was just impressed with how much of a step ladder it is to getting from to a 5K from the couch. And I love that you called out the 2 minute rule, because that's a really good rule. And keep in mind, go do squats for 2 minutes straight or push ups for 2 minutes straight. That's going to be harder than some people work out when they go to the gym for 60 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so hard because I notice this with myself all the time. And again, it's one thing that I try to keep at the front of mind as far as what I'm focused on with my own personal development and self improvement is so often I'll be like, oh, well, I can't do that thing because I don't have the time for it. Like if I don't have a half hour to write, I'm like, oh, I don't want to write for 10 minutes. That's pointless. Or, and I'm a coach of people in nutrition and fitness. And, if a client came to me and said, oh, well, I can't work out for an hour, so I'm not going to do it at all, I'd be like, well, just go do it for 20, 30 minutes, whatever you have. Sometimes what seems so obvious to you, if you're talking to someone else and giving advice, is tough to implement into your own life. So I think that that's, again, something that speaks to the importance of having a coach, is you have someone who can talk you into a more rational state of thinking. But one thing, like I said, I do try to remember in my own life is just do the thing you're trying to do, and don't worry if you can't do it for a half hour, an hour, a fully satisfactory period of time, because I think that that is a form of resistance in and of itself, where what happens at the end of that, you get to rationalize yourself out of doing the thing because you can't spend enough time on it. So it's a form of weird rationalization that your brain makes to divert you from doing that activity that's uncomfortable in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think the brain, the body, it all just wants homeostasis. It wants this pocket of comfortability that you've been in for a super long time. And any introduction of new habits is going to eventually lead to you breaking that pocket from the different trajectory that you're putting yourself on. And that's where the brain's then got to rationalize and either adjust to this new pocket or sabotage you or make it easier for you to go the other direction, because it wants you to stay in that pocket. The metabolism wants you to stay at the weight that you're at. Your brain wants you to stay in your comfort level. Everything that deters you or brings you out of that pocket is going to cause your brain to really subconsciously rationalize why you should stay exactly where you're at.
Mm-hmm. And that again speaks to the importance of habit, which obviously is the point of the entire book, but just that we, unfortunately, as humans, are very bad at making good decisions for the long term. And so habit formation is just making those good long term decisions something that is obvious. The last two things that I really like from the book that I wanted to point out for sure are the value of habit tracking and the Goldilocks rule. So habit tracking is essentially just you, and I have this on a whiteboard in my apartment where I just try to use the habit tracking rule in combination with the never miss twice rule. So he talks about when you're starting to build a habit, just make it so that you never miss it 2 days in a row. It's hard and you want to build up some form of consistency, but not getting too down on yourself if you miss a habit for a day and not letting it slide into that screw it mentality where you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to stop totally. The never miss twice rule it's very satisfying because you can build a streak even if you have some off days here and there. So habit tracking, just keeping at the front of mind. I want to do these things. I'm going to, write with a big red X when I complete them. Again, that being something that's just satisfactory as far as looking very visual. I like this habit tracking board I have because it's visual. It's something I can see when I'm achieving the habits I want to achieve. And it's also obvious where the blank spaces are where I'm not doing that. So habit tracking is something that's really positive. And then the Goldilocks rule essentially is that with every habit or with anything you're working on, there should be a zone where it's not too easy, it's not too hard, but it just pushes you enough that it keeps you engaged. So obviously, with the Goldilocks rule being, too hot, too cold, perfect, you want it to be something that stretches you, this habit, but you'd also want it to be something that is not just so easy that it's unengaging.
Yeah. I think with that habit tracking too, the more visceral you can make it, the better.
For
And
sure. Mm-hmm.
we've all heard of swear jars, right? Which is reinforcing don't swear. But one that I just thought of, if you eat out a lot, you're spending a ton of money. So what you could do is every single time you cook a meal at home, take $5, like go to the bank, get $55 bills, put that $5 in a jar, and you're going to visually see yourself saving money, and you're going to want to eat at home more because as soon as you fill that jar with that $250, then you go and do something fun or you go and get yourself something, and it's literally a reward for making decisions that were more in alignment with who you wanted to be. I
Mm-hmm.
might do that.
Yeah. I think I read this in the book, The Magic of Thinking Big, but they talk a lot about that book in that book about habit formation as well. And there was an example of a salesman wanting to hit a certain number of calls for his job. And one day just was like, okay, I'm going to try to make as many calls as possible. And then they compared that with a day where he had a stack of paper clips. And every time he made a new sales call, he would put a paper clip in a jar, and at the end of the day he would have this sign of, okay, look at what I accomplished, look at, I viscerally moved this physical thing to this physical thing. And even though it seems silly, stuff like that is so much more empowering because we are such visual creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've seen people do it with marbles. You can do it with paper clips. You can do it with money. You can do it with a stick of gum, like whatever you want, but just
Mm-hmm.
make it visual or have like an actual calendar
Yeah,
where you are drawing a big red X when you do that.
that's
And
exactly that's exactly the other thing I was going to say. Is another good example is Jerry Seinfeld. He used to say that when he wanted to, I guess for a long time, as far as I understand it, he would write a big X on the calendar every day that he wrote. So much more stand up, or maybe it was for the show, or I don't
it is
remember for sure.
writing a
But
joke. I've
yeah,
heard that in a
yeah,
book.
big red X on the calendar.
I want to say that was in, oh, I can't remember the book, but yeah, it was definitely in a book where he did that, and it works. So go
Hmm.
do it, people. Any other
So for
last thoughts?
no, I was just going to ask if there's anything that we didn't hit on as far as like things that you think about often that you learned from the book, or any big chapter summaries or concepts or anything like that.
Yeah, I think tied to making things more attractive, making things obvious or easier, never underestimate the value or power of groups. And this could be by having a friend go to the gym with you. That is now more attractive. It's easier. It is satisfying. Versus if you have a group that is saying, let's go get absolutely smashed, or a group that says we're going to, have wine night every single night for, a week straight. And that's what we do on Tuesdays or whatever. That group is a way of making things more obvious, harder, easier, whatever it ends up being. And so you can make this work for you, can make this work against you. If you have a friend that is really good at a habit, link yourself to them. That's another way that you can habit link. You can steal that power, that superpower from someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that one of the things he says is just try to hang around groups that treat your desired behavior as the group's accepted behavior or something along those lines, as the group's
Yeah.
consistent behavior, you know.
Yeah. Well, let's say it a layer deeper. Let's say you're a Seahawks fan or you're a Husker, right? That's in your identity. So when you join a tribe or you join a group, you join a city, you join a school, you join a company, you absorb that identity. And if that identity is, we're a Seahawks fan, we wear blue, you're going to wear more blue. If you're a Cornhusker, I don't know what you guys do. What would be something that you guys do that's like a Cornhusker thing?
Wearing red, we do like a go big red chant, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I'll see a Coug. This is something that Washington State we always do. If we see any Coug in any social situation, we just yell, "Go Cougs." It can be at an airport. You'll hear people randomly scream at you in China because they see you wearing a Coug hat. Yesterday, I was walking along a restaurant. I looked in and I tapped my head and I just thumbs up, "Go Coug." And the guy was wearing a Coug hat. And he's like, "Yeah." He's at family with his dinner. And it's like so ingrained in me. Now I hear myself saying that. I'm like, "You sound like an idiot, psycho,
Mm-hmm.
stalker, dude." But it's just so ingrained in us. That's just what we do. And I think that sentence, "that's just what we do," is the best way to display that your identity leads to the habit that you build. And that
Yeah,
habit that you build and that system that you have is going to lead to the goal and lead to the process.
definitely. And one more thing I wanted to mention, just a good easy example to leave people with is he points out in the book that if you get 1% better each day for a year, which doesn't seem like that much. And again, this speaks to the value of compound interest, which is what we were talking about at the beginning. But if you get 1% better each day for 1 year, you'll end that year 37 times better at whatever it was that you were trying to improve. So things just add up. And again, just trying your hardest, because it's something you have to always recommit to, but trying your hardest to not fall into that rationalization of, oh, well, I can't do a full workout. I'm not going to do anything at all. Or, oh, what's 5 minutes of, reading, writing, whatever habit it is you're trying to accrue? What's that going to do? I'm just not going to do it at all. Just understanding that every time you improve, you continue this positive cycle of getting better. And once you start to make connections with habits, it's just going to make everything better at such an increased rate that eventually you're going to see things um, have improved a lot more than you ever could have imagined.
Yep, definitely. Definitely. Atomic Habits. If you haven't read it, go read it. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. What do we got next week? I think it's the one thing.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, this is a book that's really going to kick off a productivity group of books that we're going to do. So if you are into that and want to be more productive at work and fitness, this is definitely going to be a book to check out. And the subsequent books we'll cover in the next probably 4 or 5 weeks would definitely be ones to hit on and make sure you catch. Other things to catch, make sure you join the Mindful Muscle Facebook group. That's where you can get live videos of what we're doing, live trainings. You can get the access to the Mindful Muscle mini course where we dive into the macro manual, ways to improve your metabolism, ways to organize your training, really just like a get up to speed on the core things within the E4 Fit method. And then if you're in the Seattle area, be sure and go to fullernutrifuel.com. Bam, I got it for 15% off, or you can get 15% off your meal prep, food delivered right to your door by using Paul 15. And I'm getting messages every single day from clients that are saying, I've made my life so much easier because I've removed this thing that takes so much time and so much energy. And kind of to what you were talking about, willpower, if you already know what it is that you're going to eat, it frees up space. Like if you already know what you're going to wear, if you already know what you're going to eat, it frees up space for better decision making in other areas. So definitely take advantage of that. That's fullernutrifuel.com. Link in the description. Paul 15 for your first order, Paul 10 for subsequent orders after that. Jake, any last thoughts?
No, just lot of stuff here. Don't hesitate to listen to the podcast again if you need to reiterate that stuff, and definitely go check out this book either on audio or your Kindle. Buy a copy, whatever you need to do. It's a really really helpful book.
Yeah. And last but not least, if you enjoyed the podcast, be sure and share it with a friend. Tag Jake and I. Tag the E4 Fit Method. Leave a rating, a review. 5 stars would be great. And that helps us grow the podcast and continue to get it out to other people that can benefit from this. So other than that, thank you guys so much for listening to the Mindful Muscle Podcast. We'll catch you guys in the next episode. That'll be a Q&A on Thursday. Take care.
Thanks, guys.